put out there. So Lamar is a Texas nonprofit and does not endorse candidates, but has offered all candidates an opportunity to answer questions related to work to eliminate racism and racial bias in RISD. And all candidates' interviews, virtual interviews, will be uploaded at the same exact time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
So we would love for you to just kind of introduce yourself and tell us about yourself and your background and your family and
Sure.
why you're running.
You bet. You bet. Cut me off when I go too long. So again, Chris Poteet, and I moved to Dallas in, I guess it was the end of 2003. So my background was, I went to Texas A&M, as did my wife. So please don't hold that against us. But we, afterwards, I went into the Army. So that was my path through college. And so I spent almost 9 years on active duty in the Army and was stationed overseas, west Colorado to North Carolina to Missouri. So all over the place for 9 years. And then decided to get out. And just to kind of preface that, my dad was Navy. My brother just retired from the Army. Both grandparents were Army during the war. And so it was always kind of in our blood. So that service was something that was important for me to do. And when I got to Dallas, it was a void that I was trying to fill and giving back to the community. And I kind of had to figure out how to do that. And I ended up joining the Exchange Club of Lake Highlands, which is you're familiar with it. Some aren't. It's a community organization that gives back to nonprofits in the community, and obviously is tied tightly to the schools, RISD, and all the schools within the Lake Highlands feeder pattern specifically. So that's kind of how I got into the area. But I'm married, been married since 2004. My wife, Christy, is working from home these days, like a lot of people. I've got 2 kids in RISD. I've got a 7th grade daughter at Forest Meadow and a 4th grade son at Moss Haven. And they're back in school face to face and enjoying as much as possible. My poor daughter's playing basketball, and I think this whole season they've only been able to make 2 or 3 games. But they're glad to be back. So that's my family, and obviously the 2 dogs that we discussed earlier. So kind of coming into how I got here and service, and then why I wanted to serve. One component was just loving to serve the community and finding an opportunity to do that. So Exchange Club provided that for me the last 10 years, and I was the president 2 years ago, which was awesome. And I'm fortunate enough that I got to do it pre-COVID, because it was just really a rewarding experience. But then I also did a program in 2014 called Leadership Dallas. Most people are familiar with the leadership programs in Richardson and others. And so that's through the Dallas Regional Chamber. And one of the topics that's stressed is public education. And so we spend a month doing homeworks, field trips, research, and then we have a full day where we get exposed to a lot of people in the local public education system. We spent a full day down at Irma Rangel, which is a girls' school down in Fair Park, which was fascinating. And so that day, at the time, I didn't have kids in the school system yet, and I was like a lot of people and said, public education's as important as it is to simply my kids getting a good education. But that day and that month really kind of pulled the curtain back and exposed me to what's important. Why is public education important beyond just your child and that education? So it was cool because it spoke to the impacts on our neighborhoods, specifically like RISD is a very neighborhood-centric school area. The impacts on the schools to our community, economic development, your home values, obviously. A lot of us are pretty interested in that, but, they told a story that was kind of cool that brought it all into clarity was, Boeing was going to move to Dallas potentially. And when they decided not to, their out brief they had, one of the critiques was the public school system. And they said that, this was all what was told to us in Leadership Dallas, but, they're bringing thousands of employees here and they all have families and they've got to they've got to tell those families, what kind of schools are going to be available for their kids. And Boeing looks to the local area for an educated workforce. So they look 20 years out, and they want to make sure that they're not having to import educated workforce from Houston or other states or San Antonio. And they saw a real limitation there based on the school system. So basically getting that kind of lit a fire from public education with me and a passion. And that combined with the service led me to kind of look at the board of trustees. And I've been looking at it. A buddy of mine in that class is on the DISD board right now. And I've been tracking him. Obviously, he's a buddy of mine. So I've been tracking him the last few years. And we've been talking about it. And I've really been interested in going after this opportunity to serve. And so with the service and the public education, it kind of made sense that this was a great opportunity. And so, the timing, if you wait on the perfect time, it's never going to happen, right? But the opportunity came up in the last couple of months, and I decided, hey, this is the time that we need to pursue this opportunity and give it a shot.
What year was that you did the leadership Dallas?
2014.
Oh, okay. And then I know you've been involved on the bond committee.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. So I'm on the current steering committee for the current bond. But I was part of the strategic planning committee a few years ago as well, on community engagement. They had one of the committees there. And then I did inside RISD, which is kind of another get familiar with the behind the curtain operations within the district. And then also they call it the PPC. But when they decided in the last bond to renovate Lake Highlands High School, I was part of the stakeholder group, grassroots group that gave a lot of feedback in how that was going to be done. So those are some of the activities.
Danita, you were on that bond committee too, right? So that, wait a minute.
You're muted, Danita.
The bond committee and the community engagement committee with RSD, yeah.
Good deal.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a little unfortunate. I felt bad that it hit at the time where we had to do a lot of it virtually because, we had those first couple of meetings in person, and I thought that it was, the value of just having that crosstalk and Q&A is hard to match when you got 50 people virtually, but glad to be part of it, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Well, thank you for telling us about your background.
Yeah. And so we're going to dive right in these questions because we don't want to hold you. We know it's a Sunday. Tomorrow's a holiday.
Valentine's Day.
You may have
snowy.
You may have
That's right.
plans with your love. So we're not going to hold you too long.
You bet.
So, and all questions will be dropped in the chat so you can follow and make sure you address each issue. Okay. So don't worry about the length of the questions.
Okay.
The first question is, what is your view on the importance of the Richardson ISD Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Department and the work of the RISD Racial Equity Committee and what they have done this year?
Sure. So I think that, and this is my understanding in the last, I know the last few years, but there's been a real shift in the approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In that shift, it was always something that I think was important and was paid attention to by the board and the staff. But in the last couple of years, I feel like there's been a lot of action taken. The stand up of that division within the staff was obviously the first piece of that. I think now having the council that works hand in hand with that staff is critical because now they're actually plugging in to the community and getting feedback from people like your all's group, individual parents, homeowners. So I think that's critical. And I think that actually coming up with a policy, and I'm familiar with the policy, but it's finally, now we've got something that one ties into the strategic plan with the district, which I think is critical because this district seems to, which I agree with, do a lot of, they've got a good handle on strategic planning and the importance of it looking forward. So having this issue with diversity, inclusiveness, and equity as part of that, I think is critical. But the policy itself has kind of created a framework and guidance. It's something that we can all fall back on, and whether I'm a trustee or the superintendent or anyone else, we've now got kind of a roadmap and something that we can operate within and structure to make some of those decisions and hold people accountable, hold the organization accountable, hold the superintendent accountable. So I agree, and I think that that's the big difference in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, is that now we're seeing a lot of action in this with this policy, which my understanding is, hadn't always been the case.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. So what if you were to serve as a trustee, how highly would you prioritize RISD's continuing EDI work in the next several years?
I think it's got to be up at the highest priorities, because at the end of the day, in my view, this when you boil it down, we're talking about a child, right? And our charge as a district is that every one of those 37,000 some odd kids, we have to bring them up a year, advance them a year in education each and every year. That's what we're being charged with by the taxpayers. And so you can't do that when you have barriers to that advancement. You can't do that when you have an environment that kid doesn't feel comfortable learning in that school or that classroom or with those other kids and peers or teachers. So, I mean, it's kind of an all stop if you're not putting that as a priority, because you're starting from stop. There's nowhere to go. So I think it's got to be a priority, just because you've got to look at the granular level. Sometimes we get lost, and I could see where it would be easy to get lost as a trustee at kind of the high level and the big picture, which I do. Admittedly, I'm a big picture guy, but you got to keep bringing yourself down to the ground where that one kid is going to school each day. And you've got 1 year in that one grade with that one kid. And if you don't break down barriers and you don't provide that kind of environment where they feel comfortable learning, it's all for naught. You're not doing your job. So I think it's got to be up there with the top priorities.
Yeah. And Danita's got a question for you with multiple parts, but she's going to put it in the
I've
chat.
got the chat open, so I'm tracking it.
All right. So what approaches would you like to see RISD pursue in addressing racial disparities identified in special education placement, student discipline, home internet access, placement in pre-AP and AP courses, retention in secondary GT services, and preparation for
You got muted at the end. Was it preparation for college? I think.
Yeah, 4-year colleges.
Okay.
So what we're saying is, we're identifying that there are racial disparities in each of these areas, and what could RISD do about it?
Well, so I'm reading through them here, just so you know, as we're talking them. So, sorry, there are a handful of those. Well, I think the first action and the first approach, whether it's a district or me as a trustee, is that you've got to identify that these exist, and there are challenges and barriers that exist in each and every one of these. Because if it's not admitted, if that's not understood, then, where's the priority going to be placed? Where's the effort going to be placed? It's not. Now, admittedly, I'm not an educator by trade. I'm a civil engineer. So I don't want to come across and tell a teacher how to teach. But in the role of a trustee, that's not my job either, right? So I've got to hold the administration, specifically the superintendent, accountable to addressing these and putting together processes or putting together constraints and actions to address each of these. And that's part of our job as a trustee. So, I mean, looking at some of these as I go through, special education, pre-AP, I think a lot of this, and in our equity policy, it addresses some of this by how we look at the data, the metrics, the testing scores, and how we look at that as a group, by race, by gender, and we've got I know that they've got some actions around that, but I'm glad that it was brought up, because when you look at it from a high level and you don't kind of peel apart those numbers, it's going to send you a different direction. You're not going to put the effort that's needed into that area. So I think that first and foremost, we've got to identify that these are concerns and these are issues that need to be looked at. But I would say that at the level of trustee, this is something that we would have to hold the administration accountable for, and have them report on actions and plans of actions to address each of these. So,
yeah, for sure. Let's see. The next one is, do you support RISD's recent progress in the areas of pre-K programs, ACE campuses, which not everyone may be familiar with, improvements in GT identification, and other steps taken to help close that achievement gap?
Yeah, so I do. It's funny. So you guys may have seen this on Facebook. I saw it on Facebook, and it's probably been all over the place, but it was an illustration, and it kind of struck home with me. But it was I think it was 3 kids looking over a baseball, fence at a baseball game. And, the kids are all at the same level, head level, fence level, they're at the same level. But when you look at the stools or the crates, I forget what it was, that they're on, they're different levels, and it took more for this kid to be seeing the same thing as the kid over here may have had. And so that kind of struck a chord with me on, when we talk, so the question specifically was, well, you talked about pre-K, GT, ACE. I see all of these as ways to build the height of those stools that those kids are looking over. So some kids, in my mind, some kids are starting out without the opportunities that other kids have. And we see that across the district. What's kind of crazy is I've kind of been a parent going through this and understanding the district is it's not all in one building, right? You get a whole school that's completely opposite of another school within our district. And that happens multiple places. It kind of dilutes a little bit as you get into junior high and then into high school more, but we've got kids that specifically we could say at Thurgood Marshall that don't have the opportunities coming in that somebody at White Rock or a Brentfield or somebody would. And so what we have to do is find first at the trustee level, we've got to have policy where we can address those, and that's got to fit in with our goals and our vision. But we hold that superintendent, Jenny Stone, and staff accountable to come up with steps and actions to get there. So when you're building that stool for that kid, I see the ACE program as being one of those pieces of the stool. And for those aren't familiar with ACE, it was a commitment by the district to take resources, which we all know that equates to money typically when we talk resources, but incentivizing some really effective teachers to go to some challenging areas with some kids that needed help and to bring them up to speed. And there's also some before school and after school opportunities with ACE. And so I think that we saw that there's a need and we need to take an action as a district, and that's a great example of it. I think the pre-K, we've heard the data that pre-K is critical, especially to at-risk youth coming out of certain environments. And I think that us committing to that, and I know this bond is kind of speaking to that from the facilities perspective, I think that's critical, because if we can do anything we can do to help give these kids the same opportunity, no matter where they come from, what color they are, what socioeconomic background it is, I think that's something that's worthwhile. And I keep going back to that illustration, but in my mind, we're trying to figure out how high to build each stool and what can we do what are those actions to build them. And I think these are all very relevant actions to help build those stools for kids that need it. So.
Yeah, Chris, I know exactly what illustration you're talking about. And so when we post this, I'll add a picture of it.
Great.
It is, there have been several, and that one is a little bit imperfect in its metaphor, but it's still very helpful, I think. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Especially for somebody like me that's very visual, sometimes we can talk and about whatever the topic is, but if I can see an illustration sometimes where I'm connecting some dots and it makes sense, then we can take that and we can try and perfect it through discussion. But I think it's a great starting point to recognize some of the situation.
And it connects with your engineer brain, probably.
I know. My wife gets on to me for that all the time.
Danita, do you want to do the next one, hun?
Sure. So the next question is, how important do you believe it is to implement culturally responsive teaching approaches, instructional materials, and professional development for teachers in all grades, pre-K through 12?
And the question is, how important do I see that? Is that right?
Yes,
Yes.
to implement these.
Say that. I'm sorry, didn't you?
Culturally responsive
Okay.
teaching approaches.
Yep. Okay, I see it now on the chat. No, I think it's very important, and I say that from, I mean, if you look at Richardson ISD, I think somebody said, and I don't know who does this data analysis, but we're the third or fourth most diverse district in the state. And what's kind of mind blowing in my mind, at least, was, you know, we always reference lack of diversity. We'll say, you know, somewhere like Highland Park or South Lake. But what somebody told me was, well, you know what? You go down to the valley to Farr or McAllen, and they're equally less diverse because they're very homogenous across socioeconomics, race, which was just something that was kind of interesting to me because I'd never really thought of it from that perspective. But I think that having those culturally responsive teaching approaches and materials, I think it is critical based on the diversity within our ISD. And, you know, somebody said we have 70 languages, I think, within the district, which I had no idea there were 70 languages that existed. But I mean, that's just kind of a telltale mark of really the diversity and the challenge that we have in as being charged with bringing every one of those kids up a grade level in education every year. We've got to do it in their language. We've got to do it with culturally responsive approaches, materials, and that's a challenge, right? But this goes back to the first question y'all asked. And if we can't say we're not going to fulfill our charge in educating each and every kid in the district. We can't. That's not an option. So to make that kid feel comfortable and have a environment where they're going to succeed at learning, that means that we have to put resources into materials, professional development, teachers, and that's a challenge, right? I mean, at the end of the day, this comes down to we have a finite amount of resources, finite amount of teachers, and a huge challenge that we've got to overcome with within this realm. So I think that it's very important because if we don't do that, we're going to lose kids that need it. So,
do you support direct efforts to address and prevent future incidents of racist or racially insensitive behavior in RISD?
Absolutely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, we'll do that one first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I kind of go back to those 9 years I was in the Army. The Army is quite possibly the most diverse organization. You know, you all wear the same uniform and have the same haircut, but, you know, it is diverse from a race, culture, economic background. And if you allow any of that to happen or fester, you ruin the culture. You ruin the culture, and without that culture, it's going to poison the rest of the district and the rest of the school, the rest of the classroom. So I mean, you can't. It's and honestly, you lose respect from people and you lose trust. And if we lose that, I mean, you, me, every other parent within the district isn't going to trust. You're going to have a lot of kids doing homeschool and private schools, you know. And so I think it is critical because if you've got to preserve a culture that will take care of that kid and educate that kid. And if that's lost, in my opinion, everything's lost. So that takes leadership too, right? You got to have the right leaders in place, whether that's a principal or Jenny Stone, or so you or a board or a trustee, right, on the board. So you've got to have the right people there that have that same viewpoint. So it's super important. It's not worth losing.
The next part of the question is, so what is your perspective on the role of anti-racist work and discussions about implicit bias in public education?
So, I mean, this is obviously a topic bigger than education, public education right now. It always should have been. It obviously got a catalyst through news events in the last year that we all know about. But I mean, this is something that's even bigger than that. But in the big picture in society, it is education, right? It is discussion. The anti-racist work, or I guess I'm leaning more on the discussions part, but educating people, talking to people, I think that is education. Even in my workplace, in my wife's workplace, we're doing that. And so I don't see why we would not do that in a school district where education is the job, right? I mean, it just makes sense. My wife works for a big corporation, and they've had they've been having some meetings, or I don't know what the right term would be, but it's been great because she gets on there and there'll be 50 people, and they'll have people from all different backgrounds talk about what they've gone through in life, their experiences, because especially nowadays where everybody's working on Zoom and not in an office together, I'm a white male, but I don't have that kind of interaction I don't even have the opportunity to interact with somebody that may have had a different life experience than I did. So it's really tough. So you got to find ways to get around that and get people talking and understanding. Everybody can join the Army if they'd like. That's one way to do it. But seeing my wife do those kind of things through her work, and I think that education is critical. And I think for sure that it needs to start in the school districts with kids as they're developing. It's a critical, if you miss those developmental years, then, you're going to have to work tenfold, re-educating, or like us, we didn't learn it like when we were kids as much as kids are learning it now. And it's tougher, right? Especially if we weren't in the Army or weren't in a diverse job or something. So
I'm glad to hear that your wife's company is doing that. Yeah, we hear that more and more from people in our community. And honestly, what you said about getting opportunities, having opportunities to talk and learn from people from different backgrounds is one of the reasons we created our group. So
right.
So, yeah,
I love it.
Danita has a question that she asks all our guests, not just our candidates.
Okay, sure.
So, Chris, you have this magic wand.
Uh-oh.
You can only correct one thing, and it's an immediate action. And what would be the one thing that you would correct as it relates to RISD?
Okay, I was thinking in my house or where. No, that is a tough question because that is a very broad question. Correct. So you're assuming that we're going after problems instead of supporting things that are going right or improving on them.
Anything you want. Anything you want.
Yeah.
Just makes a big change. Swoosh.
You know what? I think that in my mind, we can dive down into certain topics, issues, themes, but in my mind, we have got to have the right leadership in place from board through superintendent, through teachers, principals, everywhere. I think without that and in the culture that they need to bring, which I'm pretty supportive of the current culture, full transparency, I think we're heading the right direction. I think that leadership and culture need to be right. I've worked for, obviously an engineering firm for 14 years. We have a great culture, but you know what? It comes down to the leadership, and we have the right people there. And when you have the right people in those leadership positions and they bring with it the culture, then these type of topics, racism, diversity, they're a lot easier to approach and come up with solutions and collaborative actions and stuff. If we don't have the right leadership and culture in place, it takes years to get there. So is that a problem right now? I don't think that it's a critical Achilles heel, but it's something that I think always can be improved on. And if we have the right people in the district and leadership right now, I think that one of our challenges will be to keep them there. Turnover is not our friend, right? When we have principals and superintendents. And I think, especially with this topic, if we've gained some momentum over the last couple of years with actions taken, policies produced. I think we need to keep adding fuel to that fire and keep those people around so that we can just keep building on it. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but that's what I feel. I think I would ensure would keep.
I was telling Danita, I love hearing the magic wand answers because they're really so helpful, and we can't
Right.
wait for, honestly, the school district and the board, whoever it may be, to hear those, because
Right.
they're all such important things to focus on.
Sure.
And we want you to know that no matter what happens and who gets on the board, we would love to continue a partnership with you. And we thank you for caring about equity and for caring about the students of RISD.
Sure.
Enough to run, because I know it's a big commitment.
It's a heavy lift, but that's okay.
Yeah, and we thank you for being with us, Chris.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah,
that's it. Oh my gosh.
Anything else you want to say?
No, not particularly. I mean, I'll tell you what, one thing also I am impressed with the district in the last few years, and this ties back to your all's organization. They seem to have put a lot of effort into reaching out to the community in a lot of big decisions that they make, whether that's Danita and I being on a bond steering committee or the strategic planning. They're including parents, administrators, senior citizens that hadn't had kids in the district for years, but they're really reaching out. And I think an organization like yours, if I'm a trustee or whoever's in that seat, I mean, having those touch points to get that kind of input back into the district, I think is critical. And I think that they're doing a lot more effort in reaching out and talking. But I also know that when they talk about the board of trustees and you look at your 5 tasks, one of them is that conduit to the community. And that's what the trustee for the board's supposed to be. And so I know that if I get elected, you amongst other organizations are ones that I want to form those relationships with so that I can get that pumped into the those thoughts and feelings pumped back into the district. So it's I think it's a critical role for a trustee, and I haven't met all these organizations till running. So, I mean, I honestly, and call me crazy, I didn't know that you all were out there. And now I'm finding out I've got a bunch of friends that are members of your organization. It's great, So, but it's good. This is a good opportunity to meet you all, meet your organization. I want to keep that relationship going.
Yeah, and like I said, we're moms and more. So we have got dads and grandparents and neighbors and teachers. So we'd love for you to follow us, and we've got a website and all kinds of stuff going on.
Awesome.
So thank you, Chris.
Well, I appreciate your guys' time, and just shoot me a note when you guys are going hot with the videos or posting them, and I'll go critique myself. So.
Oh no. Yeah, you may do what the rest of us do. It's no good to watch it yourself or listen.
No. I just trust that if I had something on my face, you would have told me at the beginning instead of the end. So you're
good. Well, have fun out there in the snow.
Thanks to you both. I appreciate it. And y'all